Most people hold the belief that if they pay into a government pension plan their entire lives, that the benefit is theirs. But what if I even propose the idea that in the United States and Canada, that's simply not legally true? In today's video, we're going to talk about the legal structure of Canada's CPP and OAS and what the courts have said in the US about Social Security. We're also going to touch on what this means from an Austrian economics and libertarian perspective. So let's dive right in. In Fleming versus Nestor, which is 363 US 603, a Supreme Court ruling in 1960, the US Supreme Court made a ruling that shocked a lot of people. The bottom line is that the court ruled that Social Security benefits are not a contractual right. Even though Americans pay into Social Security through their payroll taxes, the court deemed the following: Social Security is a social welfare program, not a private pension. Your contributions are therefore taxes, not premiums. And Congress can legally reduce, restrict, or eliminate benefits, even for those people who are currently paying for it. Specifically, the court rejected that Social Security is a vested protected right or a property right under the Constitution. Now, later court cases did suggest that if you are currently receiving benefits, there are some procedurally due process protections, which essentially means that the government can't arbitrarily cut you off without due process. But that does not stop Congress from changing the law itself. So the bottom line in the US is that Social Security is a politically protected benefit, not a legally protected benefit. So what about CPP in Canada? Is CPP and those benefits therein that you've paid for a protected right? And the short answer is no. CPP is governed by statute, the Canada Pension Plan Act. And courts in Canada have repeatedly confirmed that CPP is a statutory entitlement. It is not a contract. There is no constitutional right to benefits. And parliaments at any time can change the rules, the payments, and even the formula. The Supreme Court of Canada reinforced this in decisions such as Canada versus Hislop, where they acknowledge that CPP does create expectations, but it remains a statute of Parliament, and Parliament can change that at any time. And unlike the US, Canada doesn't have constitutional property right protections for economic rights. What about old age security? Old age security, or OAS, is even less of a right. It is funded by general tax revenue. It could be changed at any time. Eligibility can change. The clawback formula can and has repeatedly changed. And of course, the benefit amount can change. In both programs, the guarantees are political. They are not contractual and they are not constitutional. Now let's put that in contrast with private pensions. While CPP and OAS are political promises, private pensions in Canada are contractual promises, and that changes everything. Employer pension plans, registered pension plans, and many insurance-based retirement strategies operate under binding legal contract and pension legislation. Now that means if you're under a defined benefit pension plan, there is a legal formula and a legally binding promise to pay a defined benefit. If you're part of a defined contribution plan, your contributions and entitlements are also guaranteed under pension legislation. And if you own any insurance-based retirement solutions such as permanent life insurance, annuities, or insured retirement plans, these are contractually binding with enforceable legal obligations. So if a private pension plan breaks the rules, you can legally challenge it. If an insurance company violates the terms and conditions of your contract, you can litigate. Your remedies include fiduciary rules, courts, and the regulators. But what if Parliament changes rules to CPP or OAS? You simply cannot take the government to court to enforce the same rules. Because CPP and OAS are not promises you own, They're programs you participate in. And here's the bottom line. Private retirement arrangements create ownership, and government retirement programs create dependency. So let's take a normal Canadian, a 25-year-old working for 40 years. And over those 40 years, he will contribute $207,000 into the Canada Pension Plan under the current numbers. So let's assume that after working their entire life, they get a maximum CPP benefit, which works out to be just shy of $14,000 a year. Now, if by the grace of God they retire for 35 years, they'll receive about $470,000 in total CPP benefits paid. So now let's compare those numbers to something of personal ownership. So imagine instead of having a forced CPP contribution, they take the same amount, roughly the same amount of contributions, and deposit it into their own investment account for 40 years. Let's also make some assumptions that they had a historical average rate of return of about 70%. Now, what does their picture look like at age 65? They would have over $1 million, and assuming a 6% rate of return, that would still produce a $60,000 a year income without even touching the principal. So after 35 years, the private investment fund is going to pay over $2 million in total income, assuming the 35-year retirement. Now, if you contrast that with less than $500,000, CPP doesn't produce a good return on investment at all. And that is the cost of overlaying the bureaucratic cost of pension management. Everybody talks about MER fees that are paid to advisors and money managers, but nobody's talking about the political cost of inefficiency here. Forced government planning with CPP requires collection, management, and payout of the same money that, if held by, in my argument, the private sector, would produce a significantly better increase in returns. Government pensions, therefore, are not just legally weaker, they're mathematically inferior. Now, to be sure, I'm making a lot of assumptions on contribution amounts, benefit payouts, and market-based returns. From an Austrian economics and libertarian perspective, this difference gets magnified. Austrian thinkers like Mises, Hazlitt, Hayek, and even Robert Murphy argue that state-run retirement schemes run into three fundamental problems. The first is the true lack of ownership. If you don't legally own your retirement plan, then you do not have ownership, you have dependence. Government benefits create political loyalty, but not financial independence. The second is the incentive distortion. Because these systems are political and not contractual, benefits often expand for votes rather than sustainability. Politicians can promise all the future payouts they want because they're not even in office when the math stops working. And the third fundamental problem is the moral hazard of collectivism. When retirement benefits are centralized, personal responsibility tends to weaken. The system encourages reliance on enhanced government benefits rather than personal saving, investing, and discipline. From this lens, government pensions aren't security at all. They are forced participation in a political system where your future depends on decisions you cannot control. Now let's move on to another issue, which is structure and solvency. The U.S. system of Social Security is mostly a pay-as-you-go system. Today's workers are funding today's retirees. There's a trust fund in place, but it's mostly funded by government IOUs. And of course, we have a demographic issue, which is there are less workers funding more retirees on a per capita basis. The U.S. trustees have repeatedly warned that the system faces imminent collapse unless there are some significant reforms in place. And there's only two choices here. Either the benefits have to be reduced, or Congress is going to have to increase taxes to pay for it. And this is why the U.S. court decision in Fleming v. Nestor matters. Congress can change benefits at any time. So CPP is arguably structurally more sound than the U.S. Social Security system, but it still has some risks. CPP actually has an investment fund, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, which manages billions of dollars on a global scale. Unlike the US system, which is purely pay as you go, it uses prior funding plus investment returns. And Canada's demographic pressure, although still present, is much less severe than the US. However, CPP is still politically controlled. Governments can change the payouts at any time under statute, and there's still political temptation in times of economic crisis. So although CPP is healthier than the US Social Security system, it's still a political program and not personally owned. And OAS carries the most structural risk because it's paid by tax revenue. There is no investment board managing a pool of securities on behalf of the OAS benefit payments. As deficits in Canada continue to grow exponentially, OAS becomes a wonderful place for governments to consider cutting back in order to tackle deficits and the debt problems. Again, it boils down to a political promise, not a contractual guarantee. So here's the truth that most Canadians are willfully ignoring. So if your retirement plan is primarily or totally based on government benefits, then your retirement is going to be controlled by politicians, legislation, and demographics, not by you. Government retirement programs are there to assist, but never to replace your own ownership of wealth creation, personal planning, and investment strategies. And legally, they don't belong to you in the same way a private pension, contract, or other investment securities do that are owned by you. So here's some takeaways. The U.S. Social Security is not a contract. Congress can remove it at any time. Canada's CPP is a statutory entitlement, and Parliament can change it at any time. Canada's old age security is pure welfare and wide open to political change. Meanwhile, private pensions and personal assets and your wealth that you create is contractual, ownable, and enforceable. And from a liberty-focused Austrian economics perspective, real retirement security comes from real ownership, private pensions, assets you own, savings you develop, businesses that you own as an entrepreneur, and from personal responsibility, not from political promises. If you found this video to be helpful in your journey of financial literacy, politics, history, economics, and philosophy, make sure you hit a like, share, subscribe, and when you do share, make sure you share it with somebody who still believes in the sanctity of government pension benefits. If you want help planning real ownership retirement strategies, reach out and let's chat.